What's up, cops? I'm Lydia from Nashville, and I got Marcus with me.
Hi, what's up, cops? I'm Marcus. I'm sitting outside in downtown Toronto, Canada.
Mm, mm. Okay, and what's this behind you? This is the first time I'm seeing it. Really fascinating.
Yeah, so this is Sarah Hagazi's mural
Mm,
in downtown Toronto. Sarah Hagazi is an Egyptian queer person who moved to Canada a few years ago. And decided to end their life. Um, and folks made a campaign and on GoFundMe, and they made a
mm,
mural for
wow,
them.
wow. I love it. I love the flowers, the rainbow flag, and then their face, kind
Like,
of the shadow. Yeah, I think it's very symbolic, the shadow on their face too. Because they went through a lot in Egypt because they were the ones who raised the rainbow flag at a concert.
yeah,
Yeah,
there
so
were a
I think.
couple of them, and it's.
Mm,
But for me, honestly, since we
mm,
really focus on diaspora, I like to
mm,
think of what they have been through
mm,
in diaspora in Canada,
mm,
in a place that they were supposed to find refuge,
mm,
and honestly, I always
right.
like to think of. Sometimes we detach ourselves as
Yeah.
Copts from other Egyptians or other
Mm,
folks. While the reality is, it's the same as a professional who work with newcomers and
mm,
immigrants, including all sorts of immigration status. Um,
mm,
Canada, like many countries, do not separate when somebody. It's the same application if you are
mm,
filing for refugee or to be an asylum seeker. Um, it's the same process if you're saying I am queer, I'm LGBTQ or trans, or I'm a political or somebody who is under or faced uh, discrimination in my own
mm,
country. And remember, many Copts who move to the US or Canada, they file asylum based on discrimination, religious based discrimination, like many LGBTQ folks around the world when they seek
mm,
asylum
mm,
in Canada or the US. So Sarah Ghazi's story is not far from us as Egyptians, and
mm,
as um, many folks would think that, oh, queer Egyptians or queer Copts have a space um, outside of
yeah.
their
Yeah.
motherland, but it's not necessarily the case. One of the
Right.
major challenges that faced Sarah was loneliness and alienation from her own
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just celebrated Pride Month, and I think about in the U.S. how the landmark case from the Supreme Court about, it's a hypothetical of this white woman who doesn't have a business yet in 2016 who sued on the theory that perchance if a gay couple approached her to ask for um, what was it, a wedding website, that she theoretically should have theoretically the right in this theoretical business to not be able to do it for them, and created a theoretical gay couple to even sue them. And the Supreme Court accepted the whole theory. I mean, it's kind of laughable. It's really sad to the point that we've gotten that this is how we're kind of ending June, on this really, really sad note that we're debating not even reality, which I think is very United States. There's no attachment to what's really happening and what people are going through, but just based on a theory of a business and theory of a couple and theory of, like, I should theoretically have the right to discriminate against gay people. So it's very sad, and I think the atmosphere is that I think not only like white Christians, but also sadly within the Coptic community, is that this will not affect them in any way if they're not queer too. um, but it's yeah, I always think of like the the Bible verse from Matthew 25 about the least of these, and people thinking that if we can beat down on other people and other identities and other marginalized people, my community is going to come on top, my theoretical community, um, right? And displacing queer people from even like the Coptic community identity. But let's, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I
But not
cannot
true.
again.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I actually cannot not think of how, as either Copts in the motherland or
Mm,
um, we hear these stories every now and then, and historical stories as well, where like, oh
mm,
my God, there's somebody like a Coptic shop has been burned, or a
mm,
or Copts are being discriminated against in their trades or in their shops,
yeah.
um, from because they are Christians in the motherland.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it is the same exact thing. Are you okay with that kind of discrimination in the motherland? And sorry,
Right.
and you're not okay about this discrimination in the motherland, but you are okay
Right.
to discriminate against any group or a group that you feel heavily
Mm,
against, like LGBTQ folks, and you
right.
give a chance to folks who are on the far right, or who really don't want you to exist in these countries like the US and Canada, and also they do
Mm-hmm.
not want LGBTQ folks to exist in
Mm,
these countries as well. They do not racism and that
mm,
kind of discriminations do not discriminate, and folks are going to discriminate against you at some point. So trying to discriminate against somebody else, um,
mm,
just because you are against them religiously or your church is rallying against a group of people,
mm,
that doesn't mean that they are not gonna discriminate against you when they win power, and try to
mm.
limit other Egyptians to get into these countries because those are not good white immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah. It always comes back to bite us. I wonder when the shift will be that we realize aligning ourselves with white supremacy and racism and homophobia and misogyny is not going to get us where we think it's going to take us. But yeah, it takes a hot minute. So I'm glad you're at this mural and you're on a rainbow bench. This is
Yeah, looks so cool.
oh, there's two of them.
Yeah,
Okay.
the more the merrier. So,
Yeah.
and folks, and it is a public park. So the mural
Okay.
is next to a public park. So yeah,
Yeah.
a beautiful place. And it's very shaded. We have a heat wave in downtown
Yeah.
Toronto today.
Mm.
So, so hopefully it would keep the shade for many people to sit and find peace.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think on this topic of like homophobia too and how it's framed within the Coptic community, you found a podcast episode that was really fascinating that Bishop Yusuf recently recorded. Where was it? In Florida?
I think it was one of the churches in
Florida?
Florida. So I also encourage folks
Yeah.
to track people in power in our communities, like Bishop
Yeah.
Yusuf. So you
Yeah.
can put them on Google Alert, or like me,
Oh.
I put them on like subscription. Bishop Yusuf has a channel for sermons
Mm.
on
SoundCloud.
whatever the podcast,
Okay.
SoundCloud podcast, like many channels. I guess they
Mm.
have good resources to run all these
Mm.
channels. So yeah, so Bishop Yusuf would release like maybe a couple of sermons a day or so, like really a lot of content.
Yeah.
One of them was like intrigued my thoughts about contemporary persecution, and I shared my thoughts before about the word persecution, where
Mm.
the word itself can mean so many things for us Copts and other groups around the world,
Mm.
but also it has been as a professional who track right wing influence
Mm-hmm.
with misinformation, especially targeting newcomers and immigrants in the U.S. and Canada. And by the way, I don't want to say that left folks too have many misinformation. So this is like when I say right wing, it's just a bracket of a set of values that folks would come with. So yeah, so the right wing lobbyists and Christian evangelical and sometimes actually Zionist evangelical lobbyists in the U.S. and Canada, they would tokenize us and use the oppression happening on Copts, whether historically or in modern days, to market and talk about the word of persecution and the persecuted Christians around the world. And at the same time, remember that those same lobbyists would be against admitting Iraqi Christians who are fleeing violence just because those are coming from Iraq, and Iraq is a bad country that we shouldn't admit folks from. So this is what they
Mm.
say.
Mm.
But of course, they don't know the nuances of like and the intricacies that there
Mm.
are Iraqi Christians, there are Egyptian Christians. Anyway, so the word
Mm.
persecution has been used as a contemporary persecution, and I was intrigued why Bishop Yusuf has this title for a sermon. And
Mm.
guess what? He is using literally right wing,
Yeah.
and I'm saying like Fox News,
Yep.
the late Rush Limbaugh,
Yeah.
and Ben Shabiru and other folks. It's interesting to track that. It's also really interesting and sometimes sad that to
Mm.
see a bishop. Actually, like a bishop with the largest diocese,
Mm-hmm.
largest Coptic
Mm-hmm.
diocese in the world, to just watch news from one source of news, mainly Fox News and other, maybe also not necessarily just Fox News, but maybe also these small videos that are running around in WhatsApp groups. And it is sad that to see a bishop is, I say, actually also demeaning the word persecution that
Oh, 100%.
value
Mm.
lots to us cops and calling using words that are inaccurate, like the transgenderism,
Mm.
the LGBTQ persecution, and using connecting LGBTQ, using a word that's not used by anybody but right wing media,
Mm.
transgenderism. And it was very sad. And also that fear mongering, you are breaching fear to an immigrant community um, that shouldn't, that really moved to the US, um,
Mm-hmm.
having a lot more freedoms, and then you want them to feel that they are still persecuted, and mainly because you are using a misinformed, inaccurate, very
Mm.
fear mongered narrative.
Mm-hmm.
That really makes it so much of a controlling, not freeing experience you are giving to Copts who move to the US.
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts. It was a wild, it was like, what, 20, 30 minutes? And a lot was
Yeah.
being said.
I listen. Heads up, cops. If you want to track these very long or very slow based
Yeah.
sermons, I listen to them like at least on 2x. So we're really
Yeah.
glad we have good
Y-
like speed up techniques on YouTube. You can do
YOLO.
this to
Yeah.
this podcast too. I like so do it. So I listened to Amber Yusuf on 2x because like it was so slow.
It is, and it's like repetitive too. Like you think there's gonna be another point, and it's the same point. I thought one first and foremost, it was super offensive towards Coptic people in Egypt. That he is putting the same. He's putting, first of all, a hugely false dichotomy that the state is saying gay people can get married, which has nothing. They're not telling the Coptic Church that they can marry like gay people. They're just saying gay people can get married. You are not forced to do anything with that information. Just FYI, if you don't want it to apply to you, it does not have to apply to you. In the same way, you don't want an abortion, that's great. If it's against your religion, that's great. But you cannot force that on other people. Um, so he's comparing the idea that in the United States, you can choose to get an abortion, you can choose to marry your queer partner, um, which has nothing to do with his life choices, just something the state has an option for other people, to martyrdom and people unaliving other people, which is a direct force. I don't even know how to say it. Like, it's more than force when you murder someone, but completely two different things. And to superimpose those two things, I don't know what type of fallacy that is, but one, already the premise of his logic is really messed up, and really shows his own distortion of how he places himself in the United States as like, um, I have to validate my own Christianity as being persecuted, which again, like you said, comes from the white Christian line, right? So white people hear these narratives of persecution, read it in the Bible, and in order to validate that kind of continuous, because they don't have a continuity. I was actually just at an oral history institute at the Highlander Center in Knoxville, and fascinatingly, it was majority people of color, obviously, and we were all speaking about continuity and displacement and how much whiteness ruptures our continuity but longs for it. Our traditions being thousands of years old, that type of thing. But anyways, so it's just fascinating to me that someone who comes directly from a line with so much continuity in the Coptic Church, and I say continuity not to mean that it's like, an illusion of there's been no change, but continuity as in like the changes that have happened have not been too much disrupted, so as to be erased. That's what we mean by continuity. But anyways, so he comes from traditions and a culture and a faith that has a continuity to it. And then he's like tapping into this culture that doesn't have a continuity, because white people consume and consume and don't end up with a lack of culture. And then they're tapping into our culture. And then why are we going over there and tapping into their culture? That's the thing that's like really mind boggling, is the reason they have this narrative of like the 21 martyrs of Libya are the same thing as like the Supreme Court saying that gay people can get married in like 2009. When was it? I don't even remember, but it was like something very recent. And he doesn't see how offensive that is because he's longing for affirmation and some kind of pick me energy from white supremacists, which is like I don't know. It's just terribly sad because he doesn't see what they're trying to do first and foremost, which is come into your culture and come into your identity and whittle it down, consume it, whittle it down, as opposed, which I don't know. I don't know if there's readings on this on British people coming into Egypt in the 19th century and what they were saying about the Coptic community then, and if there are parallels to the diaspora now and how they interact
Mm-hmm.
with white supremacy as like pick me, love me,
Mm-hmm.
choose me. And the whole gig is they want your faith. They want what you have. They want that continuity and that collectivism and that community because they know that's the nourishing part of life.
Yeah.
There's another point I was going to make, but you want to say something to that?
No, go for it, Lydia. No.
Um, it's also just fascinating to me because he's talking about um something that you don't have to participate in. You have the choice not to participate in gay marriage or abortion or what else he mentions in this podcast. But he makes a lot of choices for community members that are extremely harmful and extremely impactful. So he's sitting here talking about choice and saying that he doesn't have a choice to support gay marriage or not. When it's like you can. You do not have to. You don't even allow queer people in your church. If they are outed, you do not allow them in your church. Um so who is persecuting you, my man? Who is persecuting you? And all the other Coptic people who believe in this. This is very illusionary. But I think if we're actually going to talk about modern day, I don't even want to call it persecution, but um, a level of patriarchy and oppression within Coptic communities, that it first and foremost, we have to talk about the religious hierarchy and what they do to working class Coptic people. Um, I'm gonna get into alleged stuff here, but like, let's say allegedly, there are priests who evict people and make them homeless. There are from religious housing here. There are priests allegedly who operate with corporations to stop union activity, to go directly against working class people. So to talk about people suffering and people suffering because they can opt out of certain life choice, I don't know what you call it, legislation, but then to actively be turning around and oppressing other people and not to recognize that is really delusional. And it's really sad because I'm glad this podcast exists because someone has to respond to this and say that's delusional energy. And I don't want to be disrespectful, but I think at one point we have to be very open about, because a lot of people are going to say I'm being disrespectful, so I'm just going to go ahead and respond to this and say, like, at one point you have to engage him like he knows what he's doing. Um, because to engage him and say that he needs education or he needs to be softly spoken to ignores that he directly benefits from this rhetoric, and he knows that he does. Um, so I don't know. I don't like to claim innocence when someone is getting fed all this benefit, and then you have community members who uh, are broken off from community, or like Sarah Hergezi, and people who feel like they're in the margins, people who feel like they don't have a community anymore. And here he is just talking about persecution. Like it's offensive for everyone. Offensive for people in his diocese, offensive for people in Egypt. And like the last thing I will say is, like, I was talking to someone yesterday about a lot of the undemocratic practices in the southern diocese, because people I think forget here, but there was like several times, people here in Nashville, I will just say, it's very important for us that our priests are ordained from the community. And that's something we fight back against very actively because we feel like priests who come from outside communities are not fully equipped to understand. So they take like 5 to 10 years to fully understand what's going on in the city and then, recalibrate. So it's very important to us that the priests come from our community, and Bishop Yusuf has broken that several times, and that's upset many people, and broken a lot of the practices around how we distribute money. So people have wanted affordable housing to be built by the church, particularly for seniors. People have wanted a domestic violence shelter to be set up by the church. people have wanted a nedi to be built for the kids. So many other things that our money could be spent on in South Nashville. Um, and yet we have like I think now we're up to like 15 church buildings in the Middle Tennessee area. And still we don't have any of the things that we've wanted as a community that we've requested from, and mind you, each of these buildings is like minimum 2 mil, coming out of working class money. So yeah, so to even think about the financial abuse that's going on, to think about people um advocating, making petitions, being like, we would like this person to be a priest in our community, and Bishop Yusuf directly like removing that person from Nashville and moving them elsewhere. Like, yeah, I don't know where someone gets the energy to to make such decisions and then to put themselves on a high tower and say, we have to be strong. I really want to say people in Nashville, people in the Southern Diocese have to be strong to deal
Yes.
with this level of just undemocratic, harmful practices. So, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I just feel bad for our people that we have to listen to this.
Two things
Yeah.
I'm getting here. I think we in the future we need to talk about hierarchy and to talk about
Mm,
administrative issues, like,
yeah.
because we work in community, we are professionals. We
Mm,
see how nonprofits and charities are governed and transparent and
mm,
held accountable, and why the church shouldn't be
mm-hmm,
um, one of them. Aren't churches in North America are registered charities, and they are
mm,
treated by law as such.
yep.
So, and we see how churches, not for profits, work,
Mm,
but we don't see this happening in Coptic churches. So maybe this
mm-hmm,
is another podcast. We need to talk about this and maybe to reflect
mm,
on that topic. For me, as a healthcare professional and somebody who
mm,
work in the community, I look at leadership. So, and also since many of my friends are clergy,
mm,
bishops, metropolitans, so they are holding leadership positions, and I treat them as two entities. One on a
mm,
personal level, because honestly, I can't really break all these relationship and friendships with many people in
mm,
the church institution. One. But also the leadership position, they need to be held accountable.
yeah.
Somebody who is the leader of thousands and thousands of people, and they
Mm-hmm,
can listen, most of them at least. We know that there are some rebels and who don't like to listen, but most folks in our Coptic Orthodox communities would listen to what the bishop is telling them to do. And spreading misinformation, spreading hate,
mm,
especially also spreading misinformation while a person is holding not just a religious authority on them as a bishop, but also as actually, and we also need to change that to metropolitan. Amber Yusuf is a
mm,
metropolitan, so
mm,
as a metropolitan even, but also as a physician, and he is still using this, and we know in our communities even, we know that, for example, like Amba Yusuf, he went to the monastery right after. Maybe he might not have even done the fellowship or the required hours to get. Many of them, they take pride of like, oh, I just
mm,
left university right away and to the monastery, but they continue to use that title, even though they haven't been practiced even at all. And we know how folks who work in healthcare, they need to continuously working on their professional development to keep up. So it's really a big issue for me as a leader
mm,
who is spreading misinformation about our histories, uh, and also things that are treated. in a way as clinical, like connecting or spreading misinformation about trans and queer folks and comparing them to as if they are persecuting you, of trying to um, have their rights like
Mhm.
yourself, and many of your congregants are fleeing a motherland uh,
Mhm.
to try to find their rights in immigration land.
Mhm.
So this is a big issue for me. And the use of words like I actually want to address 2 points. We multiple times here, and I actually talk to many since I work with newcomers and immigrants who are Arabic speakers. They would say like, "Oh, we are forced to accept
Mhm.
agendas." First of all, you're not forced. Second,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, there are
Mhm.
some agendas, yes,
Mhm.
but it's not dominating.
Mhm.
Um, and so these are terms that you would realize
Mhm.
that this person is listening to certain kind of medias that are spread either through their feed on social media or WhatsApp groups. One time, I was talking to a couple of parents, and they were saying we are forced to accept the LGBTQ agenda in the at schools, and I told them about the many ways that they can
Mhm.
opt out. They can for
Yeah.
so, so there is, if you go onto the website of your school, there is a form to opt out of sex education curriculum.
Yeah.
You also have the option to put your kids at private schools that do not teach a scientifically approved sex education curriculum. You
Mm.
also have a choice to homeschool your kids. There are so many other options, so you are not forced. Just know the resources to opt out of things that are have been having many consultations. We have here a politician that ran on repealing sex education, and many cops were really rallying for that person who is against newcomers and immigrants. And when they came to power, that person repealed the sex education and made all these like, oh, we're gonna listen to parents, we're gonna hear from the
Mm.
expert and stuff like that. And they got another sex education that is almost exactly the same as the scientifically approved sex education curriculum. So folks don't know many of these intricacies. And it's because
Mhm.
of a leader like Amba Yusuf and others, especially in the
Mhm.
religious communities, that put a
Mhm.
lot of cachet to a narrative that's coming from people of God, a man of God, like
Mhm.
Amba Yusuf. Um, I would finish with with another point that actually that since also I have many friends who are clergy, and we talk about uh, these issues because guess what, they have issues and they don't know what to do with it. Of
Mhm.
course, we know that they refer to folks who call themselves clinician, and they do conversion therapy
Mm.
to queer and trans folks in our communities. But this is not this is another topic that we might talk about in the future. But I want to tell them. I keep telling them. I don't think we are at a stage. We know that other religious communities have
Mhm.
progressed or developed the word that you would use towards really affirming um, the folks who have been most alienated from them, including LGBTQ folks and women and folks who are living with disabilities, folks who are living with addiction. We know that other Christian communities have developed and they are affirming all of these categories and more of people. I don't think as our Coptic Orthodox community or the church is at this stage already. At some point, we don't know. Maybe at least not in our generation to change any of the
Oh.
dogmas. And we know that we really are really uh,
Mm.
holding into many of the dogmas. This
Mm.
sometimes could be good, sometimes could be oppressive. But I tell them, we're not asking you as a church leader for more than treating people like regular humans.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you treat somebody who's living with addiction with you know what, I actually don't want to talk about,
Mm.
because the church use the narrative of
Yeah. Yeah.
connecting people living with addiction with LGBTQ folks, uh, two different categories of dignified people. But
Mm.
I want to talk about how when I treat my kid at home, my kid who might have a learning disability or
Mm.
learning issues
Mm.
at home, and I keep telling him, "Oh, malish, happy," or you know what? Oh, my kids are really are struggling, and like this like Egyptian thing of
Mm. Mm.
yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry that you are in this situation, and because we see communities that say that, oh, we are accepting everybody, but when it comes to queer
Mm.
our trans folks, we would treat them with, oh, malish, habibi, you shouldn't be like this, or you know what, we're gonna accept you, we're gonna have you no matter what. No, you can't even treat people, LGBTQ or trans cops, like this in your community. Just treat them like other
Mm.
folks,
Mm.
like you like to be treated. If somebody
Mm.
came to you
Wild.
and constantly talking to you
Mm.
in this manner, you're not going to keep speaking
Mm.
to them. Why this person is treating me differently?
Mm.
And like the constant narrative of like, oh, love, we love everybody, but we hate the sin and all that things.
Uh-huh.
These are very oppressive narratives. You
Mm.
shouldn't be saying it. Try to talk it, tell it to your kids, tell it
Mm.
to yourself. And even the narrative of like the constant sinner thing is a very oppressive narrative that we should move away of. As folks who, uh, if you are a believer in the Catholic Orthodox Church, who have been deified
Mm.
and who have been accepting the incarnation of and all these ideas about theosis and incarnation, and you can't hold yourself constantly in front of that sin oppressive barrier. So, and
Mm.
it shouldn't be treated or used to specific people like LGBTQ folks. And actually, that doesn't change any of the dogmas.
Mm.
Just treat people
It
as
literally doesn't change
humans.
any of the. It is the dogma.
Yes, when a white homeless
Mm.
person come to your church, or these school leaders, cool Coptic priests in downtowns of North Americas, they open a soup kitchen to
Mm-hmm.
appeal to the broader community. How do you treat folks who are unhoused and reaching out to the soup kitchen? You're welcoming them and you are treating them like regular humans. And sometimes, and in many cases, way more than folks in your own community, mainly and sometimes because they are white, or some of them they are white, but they
Mm-hmm.
are giving them more of an advantage and better treatment than your very own
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ and trans cops.
And to me, like we talk about service as like this sacrifice to God, this sweet aroma to God. But to me, like, what's the point of doing a service if you can't even treat family members? So just Coptic people like they're decent human beings. So your whole house is a hot mess, but you're here saying, um, I want to do service for unhoused people. I want to do service for domestic violence survivors. And it's like, do you know what's happening in the church? Do you know what's happening in your own house? Clean up your house first. So, and this is like, there are multiple examples of this in the Old Testament too. for biblical reference. So it's a very interesting age that we're living in, where there's more of a sense of performance for everybody else to open up the soup kitchen, to open up a shelter in the church for unhoused people. And then what's going on in the household is discrimination, ostracization, full on, yeah, harm going on. I also want to say, too, about people gaining rights. It has never been a bad thing. Never in history, in US history, I will say, has people gaining rights been harmful for anybody. So the fact that we have a weekend was because of workers' rights in the 1920s. Because we have laws against child labor was because of unions in the early 20th century. Because and that impacts all of us, people who work in an office, people who don't work in an office. Women getting the right to vote has opened up other people's right to vote. So, like, every single time in the United States when the government has opened up rights for other people, the Civil Rights Act, that has opened up doors for every other community. Us thinking this is only for Black people, this is only for women, this is only for working class factory workers. It has opened up the doors for everyone else and benefited everyone else. Affirmative action benefiting white women. So you know, when we frame people getting rights as something harmful, I also wonder where that rhetoric comes from, because it benefits you, buddy, when people, you and me, when we all collectively have more rights about what it means to be married, what it means not to be married, what it means to have civil rights, what it means to vote, etc. So when we see that being taken away, and we're exactly like parading about it and saying, yay, take people's rights away, they're gonna come for you next, you on the roster. So yeah, anyways, but a lot of these people who are doing a lot of the admin work at Coptic churches, or the church servants who are doing the youth meetings, etc., these are not people who study history. They don't understand legalities or anything that's happening in the US. So they just perpetuate this narrative that the few who would benefit from our rights being taken away, so chipping away at affirmative action, chipping away at labor laws, chipping away at gay rights. And we're like, that's good. Let them get the gay people, as if they're not going to come for immigrants. As not, we're now seeing also a huge wave of Egyptians at the US-Mexican border, too. So many people who are undocumented, many people who are applying for asylum now instead of going through the lottery visa. So think about what that means for your family members. If they're chipping away at Latinx people's rights, if they're chipping away at gay rights, they're going to keep coming down the list. Yeah, but yeah, I think I would love to do a group study on like Black liberation thinkers, because I feel like that's where a lot of this thinking comes from, is the collective and community is liberation. But hopefully Coptic people get there and tap into those memory lines of people who have been here much longer than us and know what liberation can be and have imagined it that far.
Yeah, and this is what we are trying to get to.
Yeah.
Are you going to? Do you want? What kind of future are you looking to have? Are you gonna have a future for Coptic and younger generation, Coptic people and younger generation Copts who are looking under their feet and walking with a lot of fear? Or are you an institution that frees people and liberate them with, even if in a church narrative, إن حرركم الابن ففي الحقيقة تصيرون أحرارا, aren't you giving this liberation to your parishioner, or you're constantly spreading misinformation and fear, instilling fear inside their hearts in order to comply and to be like, demeaned. We
Yeah.
have lived many, like if we talk about the history of oppression that we have been through as Copts, that
Mm.
as folks who never governed themselves,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, like we have, like in the motherland, it's always that like demeaned, small people kind of culture,
Mhm.
to the point actually in an iconography in certain eras, some iconographers and icon and art historians, they tell that the dimensions of Copts have been represented in these eras of icons shorter than the regular dimension of a human, because this is how they will feel, smaller
Mm.
than they are,
Mhm.
because of a lot of oppression that they have been through.
Mhm.
You you moved here. Many Copts moved to places that have more freedoms, and without that
Mhm.
same kind of religious based discrimination.
Mm.
And then you are recreating fears that
Yeah.
some of them might exist, but most of them are due to misinformation, are due to not understanding the whole picture. I empathize with the newcomer, an immigrant who move here and get hit with all these new practices, new ideas. But remember, all these new practices and new ideas
Mhm.
are not just coming from LGBTQ folks. They are coming from all. When you are going to meet a person who has a different background, and you just need to sit with them and listen and learn, eat their food, know how they practice their life, how they
Mhm.
move around in the world. um, we have to make these adjustments over and over. So are you a leader in a Coptic community that
Mhm.
wants people who are under you or you are part of
Mhm.
to always move and mobilize in the world, small,
Yeah.
tiny moves out of fear? Or you
Mhm.
want them to be free and like to move around in this world celebrating? And that doesn't mean that they are going to leave your church institutions or buildings or
Yeah.
faith. They
Yeah.
can practice faith in a liberated way.
Yeah.
Many communities did that. Why are you constantly afraid? If they knew more,
Mm.
they would be more of a pain to me. I would not be
Mm.
able to control them. No,
Mm.
this is not healthy leadership.
No.
Free the
No.
people. Let my people go. Honestly, today we have been bringing a lot of verses, but
Mm.
it's really frustrating because many folks who would maybe might look at the title of this podcast when it is released, or they got to know us through our community work within and outside of the Coptic community, they would might call us like, oh, those are the bad people who are unfaithful. And like, and actually, what's
Yeah.
funny also that you would find a lot of series, like big of the series, because I'm a big follower, not necessarily a fan to Amber Yusuf, but with this kind of narrative, because I'm also a professional
Mhm.
who track right wing narrative, so I cannot
Mm.
not listen to it. I actually listen to right wing media way more than left wing media, just to accustom myself. So you would find a lot of sermons from Amba Yusuf
Mhm.
about atheism, which is so like they just have these like scapegoats um,
Mhm.
over and over to talk about. Why don't you talk about liberation in your sermons? Why don't you
Mm.
talk about it? Talk to the big money people in your diocese to be really helping the working class,
Yeah.
and to stop building church buildings because it is the main revenue. We know that it is the main revenue, or cops or older generation cops. They put money into buildings, not in
Mm.
services. We know that because also, but at the same time, you can change that mind, change that mentality. Isn't that metanoia? Metanoia
Mm.
is the change of mind.
Yeah.
So if you want to have, if Amba Yusuf or any Coptic leader want to
Mm.
have a change in their narrative of how they speak to people, they need to
Mm.
free them. They need to give them accurate information. They need to stop fear mongering them.
Mm,
Maybe folks who are older, they might be listening to you, but younger Copts, at least many of them, are not going to buy into this very soon.
mm,
So, do you want, what kind of future do you want this community inside your institution?
mm. Yeah, yeah. I strongly recommend reading the prophet Isaiah and Jeremiah too, because it feels like very much in both of those the hierarchy was the problem and not the people. Because I also don't want people to think that we are like criticizing Coptic people as much as we are criticizing the leadership that is perpetuating this narrative and the people who are enabling that narrative. Because obviously, if we didn't love the Coptic community, we would not be doing what we're doing right now. Yeah, I would be in a TJ Maxx or something. So, I mean, I would be shopping. But I think that it's very important that we have alternative narratives, that there is some sort of a rebuttal. And not even like a lot of people also come at us with, or me specifically, with this like, you hate him, but you said blah, blah, blah. So whatever you say about him, it's always going to be negative. And honestly, it's not even that deep for me. It's really just, I wish he would just do the right thing to save people's lives, specifically in Nashville, but like all over his diocese. Because I feel like, what's the point of doing the work he does specifically, you know? If it's not, he's going to leave this earth and be judged. And so, at least that's what I believe, is that there has to be people in this temporary life to tell you, wake up. Um, what you're doing
Yeah.
is harmful. So, that's where I'm coming from. It's not even, I like this person, I hate this person. It's just, there's someone who needs to have an alternative narrative that instead of, you know, did my mic do something weird? Or is that just me?
No,
Oh,
it's
something,
working. It's working
something
well.
did something weird. But yeah, and I really appreciated what you said about not operating from this stance of fear. That's constantly very like. um, I also am afraid of people's relationship with God if it's always constantly fear based. Like, I'm afraid God is going to see me do this. I'm afraid when, to me, the whole New Testament is against that theory of Christ living among us, and eating and drinking and being in fullness with us. So it's just, I don't know. You always feel like you're reading a different text too than everybody else. But yeah,
Yeah, I know,
yeah.
and of course, also I don't. That's why also I don't like to use verses because
Mm,
again, when you use verses, it's like other people with more religious authority or with religious authority
mm,
would come and use it to oppress you and stuff like that. So it's
interesting.
an endless. It's a sad endless game. But again, I think it should be used from time to time. Do we want to
Mm,
talk about the link? Because honestly,
yeah,
the
let's do
link
it.
that because I think that instilling fear and hate
Yes, yes.
and masked hate too, because that's the issue with our communities. They would say like, "Oh my God, we are practicing our freedom of speech." Yeah, yes, freedom of speech exists, but also remember how instilling bit by bit smaller, tiny,
Mm,
hateful things here and there, and I would include the constant push about the word sin and sinners is hate
mm-hmm,
fueling in our community. So,
mm-hmm.
folks who are using the constant hate, remember, oh my God, I'm super preachy today too, but Jesus even wasn't that focused on sin
Mm-hmm.
all the time. He wasn't.
Mm,
So anyway, even when the person would come to them and then would tell Jesus, "Oh, I'm a sinner, like I can't be next to you or something," Jesus will always bring them and really like deflecting the conversation and not to focus about the sin and the sinner.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, we use narratives like, oh, let's use an alternative sex education to tell kids about what is gender and orientation, and to keep using all the words that shouldn't be used, and that fuel at the same time protests against school boards or against any changes in the curriculum to be more open and diverse. The I remember the new one of the new amendments to the curriculum in New Jersey included LGBTQ folks, but also included folks who are racialized other than African Americans, and also folks living with disability. So other racialized folks, that is us. So in amendments that the Coptic community might be going against because it is an LGBTQ amendment, it's not just an LGBTQ amendment. In many cases, it focuses on many other minorities. The news that I wanted to share is
Mm.
about a. Can you share the link, Lydia?
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Let me do that.
An international student who in Canada, um, who an international school student mean an immigrant, a young immigrant person without a track record of like being inside hateful or anything, um, just entered a classroom of a gender studies university level classroom and asked the prof, this is gender studies, what are you teaching about? And he made sure that those are like the quote unquote bad people who are teaching about gender and orientation and other things. He closed the door and stabbed that university prof and two other students. Um, and honestly, working in the community and seeing other, like if you can just put the header, um, Lydia, seeing
Yeah.
other cops who are being very um, like fueled with protests or misinformation about gender LGBTQ folks
Mm.
um, could get to the degree of this person if we don't stop hate and the masked hate that is happening in our community. We see in our social media platforms when a Coptic person
Mm.
is affirming LGBTQ folks, many folks would really use hateful words against them, or in the comments. At Progressive Cops, we get a lot of hate and a lot of
Mm.
hate
Mm.
messages, comments, and private messages as well. We accept, we welcome any comments, honestly, and we talk to many. And it's interesting that when I talk to, we can just close the share
Mm.
screen, Lydia. It's interesting that when I talk to most of these folks who are talking hate things and they might
Mm.
sometimes be violent in their
Mm.
speeches about LGBTQ folks, I find them high schoolers. They just entered college, but they would be writing their name in Coptic. They would be having their. I We got actually one time a person who has the an icon of the Pantocrator
Mm.
and was commenting on like the one of the feminist posts on our page, and an icon of the maybe I would just use it another time, an icon of the Pantocrator, and he's using the word Sharmuta. So it's like just because you are a crusader copt
Unreal.
and you are at Sunday school and you are using hymns and you are a deacon and like cute and using iconography, but for bad people or other people who are providing another narrative of inclusivity and hope and anti-hate, you can use words like sharmuta to
Mm.
as a slur for them.
Mm.
Is this what has been taught at youth groups, at the
Mhm.
churches,
Mhm.
by alienating other groups of people? Is that the message of hope and
Yeah.
really real love
Yeah.
beyond sins.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you are doing to
Yeah.
youth in your churches. They
And that's
might
why.
be in the
Mm,
future like this international student. And it would be
yeah.
really terrible for our Coptic communities to observe this at some point. This should stop.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point too is, the violence will get replicated in our community because if you have all this fear and paranoia just sitting, that's really toxic energy in our community. It's going to start harming the marginalized, right? So yeah, it'll be more immediate than the state violence that will happen. It'll be within our own people, which Nashville is also a good case study for this, but we're
Another
we're not going
podcast.
to, yeah, another podcast another time to discuss harmful practices within communities beyond the hierarchy. So yeah, I'm glad that we kind of ended on a somber note, but on really the reality of what hate speech brings about. Yeah, I feel like within a generation, you see all the violence that it can erect. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for being in this conversation. It's a very hard one
Thank
to
you, Lydia.
have.
And
Yeah,
it's nice. I want to go back and center our
yeah,
LGBTQ cops,
yes.
and I tell folks who are using narratives like contemporary persecution, like Amba
Mm,
Yusuf, and other folks in our communities,
mm,
and looking back at Sarah Higazi, who
mm,
ended her life because of many reasons, mainly from our own communities in diaspora. And I'm focused now on diaspora because many folks would focus on what happened to
mm,
Sarah in Egypt. No, Sarah had a good, like an opportunity to have a new life at a new country, but Egyptians weren't kind to her in
mm,
diaspora, like many queer and trans Coptic folks haven't been
mm,
treated as humans in our Coptic communities.
mm-hmm.
And mainly because people like Amber Yusuf and other Coptic leaders who are not, who are against other people's right to
Mm-hmm.
exist. So
Yeah.
we wanted to center them and let's avoid having
Mm-hmm.
another scenario like Sarah Higazi
Yeah.
to choose to end her life because of our um, hate, the hate in our communities. We can stop this from happening. We can have better, safer communities
Mm-hmm.
for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
including our LGBTQ um,
Yes.
kin.
I mean, we will catch up with y'all. Hopefully, another podcast episode this month, and we're on TikTok, aren't we? Or not yet?
Yes, we started a TikTok.
Yeah,
It's in
find
the
us on TikTok.
development.
Okay.
So you would find us. We're gonna share more reels and TikToks in the future. So follow us and send us your feedback.
Yeah. Send us your feedback, y'all. Have a good day. See ya, Marcus.
Bye, Lydia.